Right, good morning, everybody. Thanks ever so much for the introductions, and welcome those who are online on the screen and elsewhere as well. So the theme of your conference today is a resilient internet. But I know many of you will also be wishing for a resilient government, which isn't quite what we've got at the moment. But you know, whatever else the internet age has brought us, I don't think anyone would have foreseen the live webcamming of a decaying lettuce being really Tim Berners-Lee's vision for the internet. But look, I mean, at least the new Secretary of State is still the new Secretary of State and not the old Secretary of State, which is what it could have been. And I'm sure we've all got lots of different opinions about the old Secretary of State, Nadine Dorries, but actually, to be fair to her, you know, she did do what others before her hadn't been able to do and really push through the online safety bill through most of its stages in Parliament. But jesting aside, in all seriousness, you can't have any kind of resilience, internet resilience or anything else without stability. And as I'll come on to say a bit later, we've seen that with the online safety bill in particular. It was due to pass its last stages in Parliament before the summer, and then again today it was supposed to have its last stages, but on both occasions it has been pulled. But before I get on to that, I did want to pick up on your bigger theme and some of Labour's current thinking around digital and tech and the internet, and namely how we fulfil the great promise of the digital age and make it work for everybody. Who benefits from the digital age, and what does resilience mean today? If we compare the online world today, where we were in 2006, when the first internet governance forums were launched, we've had wave after wave of technological and digital change. AI was science fiction, not living, breathing science fact. Smartphones, smart devices and smart homes were all twinkles in inventors' eyes. Social media was just being born. Video sharing platforms were in their infancy. Indeed, the World Wide Web itself was very much still young. The truth is that policymakers and legislators were facing this digital tsunami in rubber dinghies, with analog regulation not fit for the digital age. The world is changing at breakneck speed and we can't paddle fast enough to keep up with it. The promise of the digital age was meant to break down barriers, spread and share knowledge, and join up the whole world with opportunities this presents. But in many ways, it's done the opposite. So far, the digital era has been marked by a concentration of power, data and influence in the hands of tech giants and the new monopolies, with huge power over what we buy, how we live, and indeed what we think. Automation working against the interests of workers. AI for the exam boards, not the students expecting fair outcomes in their results. Small businesses locked out of online marketplaces or quickly gobbled up by a bigger player. Creatives sometimes not receiving fair reward for their own content. The question before us then is, who benefits from the digital era? Will it live up to its promise to truly transform our economy, society, and our world, or will it further entrench existing inequalities? Or can we unlock the power and opportunity of the digital revolution in the interests of the many? Because a resilient internet draws that resilience from its users. So one of the questions Labour will be looking at over the coming period is how to make the tech and digital revolution work for society and the wider economy, and looking at the power balance between people and platforms. Regulation is at the heart of a resilient internet, fit for the future. And while some see regulation as a dirty word, most understand its power to set a clear direction, a clear level playing field, and to build confidence which can harness the power of the internet age for everybody. We will look to strengthen, not weaken, competition by regulating for growth. We want British businesses to win the global race for tech and digital technologies. But to win the race, players need to know the rules of the game and be playing on the same pitch. In the information age, where those with data wield the power, opening this up and having a clear framework for using data is an urgent task. We support the strengthening of the Digital Markets Unit and have called for government to bring forward this legislation. We want to see news publishers fairly rewarded by platforms for their work and want action across the platform economy to ensure creators are fairly remunerated. And beyond regulation and legislation, the promise of the digital age requires a digitally savvy and digitally connected society. A resilient internet is an internet open to everyone, where there are no barriers to connection and accessibility, whether physically or socially. Yet there are too many who are unable to access the online world for whatever reason, whether that's because digital infrastructure doesn't reach them, they can't afford to access the online world, or because they're digitally excluded for other reasons. Too many people, particularly, but not only in rural areas, can't get a decent internet or mobile connection. Not only is this not right, but it's also hampering our economic productivity. That whole swathes of this country can't take advantage of the opportunities of the digital age and the digital economy. And we need a more concerted action to get the excluded communities online. Whilst the government promised a £5 billion programme through Project Gigabit, a fraction of this has been committed, and rollout to areas which aren't commercially viable is still woefully slow. With the chaos we've seen over the last few years, we've no ministerial focus on rollout and ensuring that there is a joined up approach to getting cables in the ground. We are planning our own plans to boost rollout, but digital and telecommunications connectivity is about much more than cables in the ground, with developments such as industrial 5G and satellite internet. The UK's investment in applying these technologies lies significantly behind our OECD competitors. We need to learn the lessons from the resilience on Who Are We 10 years ago, because a resilient internet is also about security and sovereign resilience of our infrastructure. We want to see a national effort to boost connectivity across the telecom sphere. Even where connectivity exists, many can't afford to access it. Ofcom reports that nearly a third of households are having problems paying for their broadband, phone and streaming bills, double the number it was last year and highest since their records began. In a recent Lloyds Bank survey, a quarter of adults not using the internet in the past 3 months gave the reason it's too expensive. At the same time, 97% of eligible low-income families are currently missing out on a social tariff. Meanwhile, it's been reported that broadband prices could rise by a quarter, whilst firms are in line for a £1.7 billion windfall as a result of above inflation price rises. Broadband is the newest utility and essential for everyday life. It's not a luxury. The increasing cost of broadband is set to get worse as wholesale price caps were recently deregulated. Whilst ministers may not have foreseen the sky-high inflation we're now experiencing when they made the decision in 2019, they have given the green light for higher prices for consumers in the face of industry warnings. That's why I've recently called for a new approach with a 3-point plan to tackle the broadband cost of living crisis. I want to see a reversal of the wholesale price cap made in 2019. I also want Ofcom to review consumer protections, to take action against mid-term contract price rises and other hidden penalties. And I want a mandatory industry-wide social tariff fairly funded across industry so that low-income families can join the digital age. But digital exclusion is not just about affordability or connectivity, but also about those who don't have the skills or confidence to go online. The Fabian Society's recent excellent report on this issue showed that despite the pandemic pushing more people online, older people, people on low incomes and disabled people were all disproportionately prone to being offline or having limited digital capability and confidence. As Keir Starmer and others have said, spreading digital skills will be at the heart of the next Labour government's agenda. Perhaps the most pressing prism through which we must view those in whose interest the digital age serves relates to online safety and regulation of social media, something I know you're discussing today. Whilst it's not perfect, I've been a long-standing supporter of the online safety bill because bringing in a regulator with powers and broader regulation is so urgent to protecting people online and holding business models to account. There's a huge cost of delay, and I do worry that any further kicking of the can down the road would jeopardise the entire bill. In the 5 years since the bill was first promised, there have been almost 10,000 hate crimes committed online. This is likely to be the tip of the iceberg, as many instances go unreported or may not reach the criminal threshold. The inquest into Molly Russell's case shows the urgency with which we now need to deal with online harms and the business models of platforms which push damaging content through unaccountable, opaque engagement algorithms. Since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, state-sponsored disinformation has run rife on social media. False claims are going viral, amplified by Russian-linked fake accounts purporting to be fact-checkers. This comes after a coordinated campaign by Russian officials and others attempting to discredit the Skripal poisoning. Whether it's state-linked actors or those seeking to make money or gain notoriety, the reason these things proliferate on social media is because the business models of the platforms actively reward sensationalized, counterfactual viewpoints, misinformation, also by promoting self-harm and suicide, amplifying hate, and so on, which in the offline world would be a fringe actor standing on a town square trying to get the attention of passers-by, but under the current terms of our social media platforms can go viral very quickly or cause serious harm. Just this week, a BBC investigation found that conspiracy theorists who claim UK terror attacks have been staged are tracking down and tormenting survivors. In the offline world, these theories just wouldn't get any oxygen. The online safety bill is an important first step to holding social media companies to account for their business models, algorithms, and policies, which almost encourage these harmful behaviours. With Elon Musk's recent purchase of Twitter, we now have a very powerful platform which shapes news and opinions owned by just one person, making the need for social media regulation all the more vital. But I do want to be really clear with you about this today. We've received advice, the same advice the government has received, that if the bill doesn't reach the House of Lords by Christmas, it could run out of time completely. The Secretary of State says she wants to rewrite the bill, yet rather than watering it down and removing key protections, the government should stick to the principles of duty of care on which the bill was originally drafted. As I've said repeatedly, we stand ready to pass the online safety bill to get it from the Commons to the Lords and onto the statute books. It isn't perfect, but we mustn't let perfection be the enemy of the good. So finally, I just want to talk to you about Labour's plans to harness the digital age for the many and not the few. I've called it a new settlement for the digital age, where power, wealth and opportunity is diffused. As Harold Wilson once called on the country to harness the white heat of technology to work for everyone, the next Labour government will seek to harness the white light of the digital age to make the digital revolution work for all. We will bring together innovators, business leaders, civil society, trade unions and others, you in this room and those across the country, to harness and shape the digital age for the many, not the few. Just as Britain led the world in the Industrial Revolution, Labour is ambitious for Britain, and we want our country to be at the forefront of the digital revolution. And just like the Industrial Age needed rights for workers, new forms of democracy, and the creation of the welfare state and the NHS, the digital age requires urgent shaping in the interests of workers, consumers, and democracies. Labour will harness and embed digital and tech to transform and improve our public services as well, with an ambition to make the UK one of the most connected countries in the world and across places, with no area left behind on gigabit broadband and standalone 5G infrastructure. We'll build a new settlement that put notions of security, prosperity and respect online at the heart of a programme to make the web work for people, not work against them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for that fantastic speech. I think you've agreed to take some Q&A, so maybe if you take the seat here, I can help moderate that for you. I was just taking some notes during your speech, and I think it was really fascinating when you're talking about the sort of potential of technology. You've had unlocking the power, making technology fit for the future, setting a clear direction, strengthening, harnessing, helping the UK win the race. But also I heard that you mentioned this concept of accountability. So I thought that was just quite interesting about how can we make regulation fit for purpose and balance these two sort of competing priorities. And I suppose maybe that's a question that I will sort of kick off with, is how do we balance innovation with this concept of accountability, which is really important, and as you mentioned, especially when we think about online safety, but also things like data protection, which we understand is also at some point in its parliamentary passage. So maybe we'll kick off with that, but also we'll be taking questions from the audience. So if you do want to ask a question, please raise your hand. And if you'd like to submit a question virtually, we have representatives in the room who will be able to speak on your behalf. So maybe we'll kick off with that question and then take anything else in the audience.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go easy on me. Don't make it too technical. I'm a politician, not a technocrat. But yeah, no, I mean, look, I think these balances are at the heart of the kind of debate that we want to kick off. And I think that's why I do believe there is a good role for good regulation, where you have a level playing field and where you can perhaps open up, but keeping the confidence of consumers, things like data and so on, so that new small businesses, innovative businesses can actually enter the marketplace. I mean, we're seeing at the moment that is the barriers to entry are very, very high, because unless you already have the technologies and you already have the data at your disposal, then it's quite hard to break into these markets. So I think actually many would argue at the moment we're stifling innovation by not having clear rules of the game, clear boundaries, and some good regulation on the side of growth and innovation, and on the side of consumers and for public good, rather than just in the interest of those who already hold data or who already hold the technologies and the power of the platforms. And we're seeing that in many different walks of life, whether it's sort of small businesses having to find themselves on certain apps sort of charging quite a lot of money, they've got no alternative, or whether it comes to sort of workers and how their decisions around how they work are being made without any accountability, or consumers or democracies. I mean, we see it right across the pitch.
Thank you. I think you made it. Sorry, my microphone is off. I think it's always a challenge when we're living in this hybrid world. But yeah, I think you made a really good point about consumer confidence. I think that's really vital for all technologies. I think confidence in digital products and services is really essential. I think we have a question which Nick will ask.
Thanks very much. Yes, we've got several dozen online participants, so it's a fully hybrid event. It seems to be working okay. So a question from Sklovik Skelton at Tech Target for Lucy. You mentioned that Labour want to introduce a mandatory social tariff, but you also said that 97% of people currently eligible are not claiming tariff. So how do you ensure a higher uptake of the social tariffs if you were to introduce them? Is this question?
Yeah, great question. I mean, look, I think the reasons why people don't take up the social tariff are many. Some of it is because they don't know it's available, and it's not well advertised. They're not signposted towards it. That, I would say, is probably one of the biggest sort of barriers, that when people are trying to get a broadband package, if they are eligible, it should be something that they are signposted to. And some companies do that really well. Others don't do that very well at all. I think obviously one of the challenges is something I often say to providers and others when we have these conversations is many people in my own constituency, Manchester Central, although it's got the nice busy city centre bit, it's also a very, very deprived constituency. Even at a social tariff level, would that be a priority for some of my constituents? Do they understand the value of what it would bring to them, or how it would benefit their lives to actually go on broadband, or do we need to look at other things around mobile data charges as well? I think as well. So we want industry to come together with Openreach, with others, to have a better advertised, better available, better targeted sort of social tariff that I think more people can take up. But I don't think we would never see a situation of 100%. Or getting anywhere near that, I don't think, because quite a lot of people just can't afford even £15 a month or whatever the social tariff might be for their broadband. But for others, it is a barrier, and they just don't know it. They don't know it exists at all at the moment.
Thank you. I think we had a question in the back.
Press button or anything? Okay. Yes, thanks very much. You talked about internet sovereignty. But the reality is that it's a very international thing. I mean, this is the UK IGF, but it's operating in the very international world. The vast majority of the big internet platforms are not based in this country. Most of them are based in another country. Short of something like the Great Firewall of China, what sort of plans do you have for strengthening UK internet sovereignty so that we can actually do some of the things that are sort of suggested in the online standards bill?
Thank you. So what was your name?
Philip Ingleson.
Philip. Hi, Philip. Yeah, I don't think I used the phrase internet sovereignty. I think I was talking about technological sort of resilience as part of that. So I think there's a couple of different things in your question, but that maybe sort of speak to the same thing. I mean, one example I always give is, we invented the silicon chip in this country, but we didn't have Silicon Valley in this country, because we're very good at often at inventing the technologies and being at the vanguard of the latest technologies. We are not very good as a country at kind of using that to its best effect, or to then getting the kind of economic and business benefits that could bring, because we don't then get it out into the wider economy or turn it into successful businesses. So that's something that across the piece Labour is looking at, with Johnny Reynolds, the Shadow Business Secretary, and Rachel Reeves and others, about how we can, and we've got Jim O'Neill working with Labour on how we can ensure that we turn our best ideas into good long-standing sort of businesses. And I think that applies to the digital technologies as well as other technologies too. But then I think there's another question about sort of national resilience, and it's partly related. When you take the Huawei example, if 10, 12, 15 years ago we had properly co-invested in some of these technologies, as other countries do, partnerships of government and business coming together to say, these are the technological advances that are coming, can we make sure we've got the technologies, the inventions, the innovations, the businesses to really seize those opportunities in this country, in a public partnership kind of approach, which I think is what is necessary, then we wouldn't have found ourselves in the situation where we were so reliant on Huawei 5G technologies, which has now been, a great effort to sort of take out of the system. So I think it's important, not just for the economy, but for our national resilience, that we do have these sort of public-private partnership approaches to seizing the opportunities of the latest technology. So industrial 5G is another example that's often discussed, with me. When you look at what the UK invests in the opportunities of industrial 5G, it's around about £200 million a year as a country. We sort of invest in that. Germany at the moment are investing around £7 billion a year in industrial 5G. Now, there are lots of opportunities here. It's not just sort of backing one winner, if you like, but I think that gives you a sense of the sort of scale of the task that we're up against with other countries, and that's why we often find ourselves as the poor losers when it comes to really seizing the opportunities of new technologies and innovation.
Thank you. I think we had another question at the back of the room.
Yes, my name is Terry McCarthy. It's a question of the online safety bill. One of the main sticking points on this bill has been the legal but harmful argument, i.e., we need to do something more than just simply block illegal content. We need to block something that is difficult. And it seems that this is a very difficult question to answer, and so we sort of pushed it off into secondary legislation or to Ofcom. You think that's the right approach? And do you have a sort of solution for how we square the circle on this one?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This is definitely the most contentious part of the bill, and is the part of the bill that I think we're about to see quite substantially rewritten. So there will therefore be a question, although we want to get this through, like, have we got enough time to properly sort of scrutinise some of those significant changes? And then they're not new. These are issues that have been raised with the government over at least 2 years since they were first mooted. What I've consistently said in the House of Commons and to ministers and elsewhere is that I think if they stick to the original principles of impact and duty of care, rather than trying to police individual pieces of content, what is harmful but legal, and give Ofcom the powers to assess that, then I think they will get themselves out of some of this cul-de-sac they've got into around sort of free speech and some of these issues. So, for example, if you let's take the Molly Russell case as an example. Obviously, posting information online about how to commit suicide or other suicide prevention or suicide information is not in itself. And take aside that she's a teenager, she probably wasn't on the internet as a teenager, probably put a wrong age on there anyway. But let's just say she was 18 for the purposes of this discussion. The harmful aspect in the Molly Russell case was the way in which, firstly, she wasn't. If you're searching suicide, you would hope that you would get some other flags and signposts that would send you to the Samaritans and to other places, rather than take you directly to information on how to kill yourself and other people who've killed themselves and that kind of thing. But then, obviously, with the engagement algorithms, what then happened was her timeline was just filled for days and days and days with other information that the algorithm decided she would find interesting because she'd searched and she'd been looking at suicide information. She was then overwhelmed with all this information around suicide and self-harm. And so the harm came from that mainly, rather than the individual posts, or we need to take down all of these 15 different posts that she saw. The challenge was the algorithm, essentially, and the engagement algorithms and how that works, and the fact that even in the face of the coroner's findings, some of the social media companies didn't accept that they were accountable for that, or they held some responsibility for that. I think, to me, sort of speaks to that issue fully. That I'm less interested in the person who's put on a post on social media or something on Pinterest or YouTube or something about suicide if no one really sees it. It's not really causing that much harm. I'm more interested in the fact that lots of people then are actually encouraged to see it. That's where the harm comes in. So I think I've encouraged the government to try and do that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I can see some people nodding, so hopefully it does.
Thank you. I think we had another question online, but if you also have any in the room, okay, great.
So a question from Ian Corby. Ofcom's published roadmap for implementing the online safety bill suggests they will take until 2025 to even begin enforcing the new laws. I mean, there are people from Ofcom in the room, so they can tell me if that's wrong. Their record on video sharing platforms, still no action after 2 years and none for yet another, is not a positive example. So the question now is, would you support adding deadlines to the bill to concentrate their minds?
Well, good question, Ian. To be fair to Ofcom, I actually think there are some, they haven't been given some of these deadlines, and there were, in early drafts of the bill, there were kind of delays to when the bill would become law and unenforceable, even though it would have passed its, although obviously we're now delayed anyway. So to be fair to Ofcom, I think they are trying their best to sort of navigate an ever evolving timeline, which is still evolving as we speak. As I say, it should have been back in Parliament today, and now we've got the business right through till towards the end of November, and it's still not on the Commons business at that stage. I've had a few conversations with Ofcom about their ability to be the regulator. I think two things I'd say. One is, I actually think we do regulation in this country pretty well, to be honest. I think we have good regulators who aren't trying to sort of seek the limelight. No one really, it's not a household name who the chief exec of Ofcom is, and I think that's a very good thing. There are other kind of sectors where that wouldn't be the case, where there would be a sort of household name. I think we do it very well. So I've got confidence in Ofcom. I think they are recruiting quickly, and they're setting things in place. But they're doing it around an ever-changing deadline. And then the only other thing I would say is that I would have given Ofcom more powers. I think there aren't enough sanctions, there aren't enough tools in the armoury of Ofcom to actually do some of the jobs that we're asking them to do. And that's some of the things we've been pressing as the bill's been passing through Parliament. So hopefully people in Ofcom like my answer anyway.
Thank you. I think we had a question over there, and then two online and another in the room. So maybe that will be, if we'll see for time, but maybe those will be the first. So I'll hand over to you first.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. My name is Andrew Campling. I'm a consultant in the tech industry, but also chair of governors at a school. You probably know that schools in the UK are required to have effective content filtering in operation in the schools. Some of the current developments underway in the internet standards community would potentially bypass that content filtering, and equally bypass content filtering for parental controls in homes, so would make it easier for children to access sort of suicide related content, for example. Part of the issue is that although the IGF embraces the sort of multi agency sort of model, that's not really the case in the sort of tech standards arena. The sort of next meeting of the standards body coincidentally is in London next week. The tech sector is extremely well represented in that body. Very few civil society groups are involved, very few governments are involved, although in fairness, the UK is one of the very few exceptions in that. It will be fantastic to see the UK government get other governments to engage, and other civil society groups and so on, so that the effect of things like encryption that bypasses content filtering was actually thought about, and maybe the approach was taken. So I'd just be interested to get your view on, if dare I say it, politicians and others actually getting more involved in the nitty-gritty, actually in the technical development, so that the direction of travel isn't harmful.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I don't really know about that body or those some of those issues, but I think this is where things do need to be brought out into the public sphere a bit more, and you need to have that accountability so that we all understand, as parents, consumers, teachers, or as governments, what certain technologies or devices can or can't do, and what they're supposed to be doing. Is there a way of bypassing it? Isn't there? How do we stop that, and all of that kind of thing? So I think there needs to be more public debate, more scrutiny, more accountability, and possibly we need to look at some of the models that we've used in other areas of public life, like around sort of health prescriptions and things like that, where you have more formal bodies that bring together civil society with industry, with ministers and others to agree a fair sort of way of doing things. But I'll look into that a bit more. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we have, if we go to Nick for one virtual, then I'll go back into the room, and then back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Danny. Philip Virgo. So Philip is pretty well known to people in the UK IGF, but he's convener of the Cyber Resilience Centre for London, latest of national network of partnerships between police, local government, academia, and business. So Philip's question is, will Labour consult with those already working locally on cyber business resilience, or try to agree/impose national solution?
No, I mean, I think our view on these things is to always sort of work in partnership, and to, you know, what I always say to people is, look, we're the politicians. We know how to, well, we think we know how to get good legislation through, take the public with us, win public debates and arguments, and set a mission and a direction of travel for a country on policy areas. We aren't the experts, and we, you know, any politician who tells you they're an expert, don't believe them, which you probably don't anyway. So, you know, we rely very much on a sort of partnership approach. Cyber security and resilience is one of those things that's sort of partly shared. Was quite a lot shared with the Home Office team, and it's something that myself and Yvette Cooper discuss pretty regularly as well. So no, Philip, if you're an expert, you can expect a call at some point.
Thank you. And in the room.
Hi there. Thank you, Lucy, for your words. Glenn Tarman from Full Fact. I wanted to take us back to the online safety bill. I know we've got a session shortly. There's wide concern across civil society that the bill we'll see reappear will not be one that will tackle harm in the way it should. And on our side, because we deal with mis and disinformation, we're concerned as well that the protections for freedom of expression won't be strengthened either. And we don't believe that the two are incompatible, frankly.
No.
And so we could and should see a much better bill come forward. We suspect we won't. So I just wondered, from Labour's stance, what you'll be looking out for, whether there is the prospect of the Lords and the House of Commons actually strengthening the bill. The government have been very resistant to change all the way through, as we've seen. And we know we won't get what would be really good regulation, and it'll take a while to go through. But is Labour considering also then what comes next? If we get a bill that won't be perfect, that won't be doing everything, will this be a continued agenda for Labour? We're coming up to an election. There'll be all kinds of debate about what may happen next, or what's emerging from the weaknesses of the regime. Thank you.
Well, it undoubtedly is a continuing agenda. I mean, one of the early criticisms I had with the bill was I didn't think it was future-proofed enough in terms of the new technologies, you know, developments in the metasphere, for example, and things like that. We're already finding difficulties with issues around regulation of AI and virtual reality, and all of those things are already not going to be really covered by a bill that was first conceived of 5 years ago, before TikTok, before we were on TikTok, let alone everything else. So, you know, it's undoubtedly, I think, you know, an evolving piece. In terms of, you know, I agree with you. The bill is not one that I would have drafted in the same way, and not one that I would have given the same emphasis in places and more emphasis in others. And I certainly would have had more sanctions available and more powers available to the regulator to open up, scrutinise, and to for criminal as well as financial sanctions where necessary. But I think that the most important thing at the moment is to get a regulator set up and to get them doing the job as far and as well as they can do it under the powers of the current bill, and from there I think gaps will emerge even more clearly and so on as that happens. I do think the bill, obviously the government are going to come back with, especially on the legal but harmful section, they're undoubtedly going to come back with quite a big rewrite on that. You might know more than me on that, but I think they're probably going to come back with some kind of opt-out or opt-in type thing on that. But it will then have to go through the House of Lords, and that's where changes are made to bills, really. That the government don't concede in the Commons, they don't need to, they've got a large majority. And the committee system, they did concede a few things, to be fair, at committee stage, but nothing substantive, but some things. But the House of Lords, there is no government majority in the House of Lords. There's a lot of peers very, very interested in this bill there. And we, from the Labour side, we've got Will Stevenson working on the bill for us in the Lords. He's incredibly effective at building cross-bench, cross-party alliances to sort of make changes. And I think given the given that the bill, this is a sort of technical issue, but the bill can't be rolled over again once it reaches the Lords. So there will be a time pressure coming up the track at the other end of this bill in the Lords, which and that time pressure usually allows for quite big compromise in my experience. So hopefully we'll get to that place.
So I'll hand over to Nick for a virtual question.
Actually, this is my question. So I think a lot of the things you've touched on today, you could look back and say the Brexit vote has cast a long shadow. Sorry, Nick Wenden's Smith, by the way. And one of the things that we would have been signed up to had we stayed in the EU would have been the Digital Markets Act, which has now come into force. So I was wondering whether a Labour government would essentially follow the European lead on other matters like that, which don't seem to be politically as divisive. These are the sort of technological type things we're talking about, regulation for growth and gatekeeper platforms.
Yeah, well, I mean, the government are bringing forward their own Digital Markets Act, so we'll see how divergent that is. But you do need to have a certain amount of level playing field for everybody to operate on the same systems and in a way that's kind of free of some of those barriers and so on, which is obviously what the single market and the European Union was kind of all about. So but what we've said on sort of these things to do with Brexit, and they go way beyond the sort of conversation we're having today, is that you do have to make Brexit work. We're not going to be revisiting the Brexit debate, but the idea that we can sort of go it alone on all of these issues and diverge to the extent that sort of Rees-Mogg and others kind of want us to do is just anti-business, and it's anti sort of competitive, it's anti sort of growth. So those platforms kind of exist in order to allow for businesses to operate across borders and to do so sort of freely and in a way that helps their businesses to grow. So we'll be looking at some of those issues as the Digital Markets Bill comes before the Commons, if indeed it does, because there's quite a lot of bills that the DCMS are supposed to be bringing forward, which we haven't seen yet, under the white papers and things, which we still haven't seen.
Maybe we'll be able to squeeze one more question in virtually, and then I'll just see what time we get to.
Yeah, there's lots of good questions here. So just picking out one. It's actually anonymous, which I'm not quite sure if it's in my, but it's not. It's a topical question, which is, you mentioned one man, Elon Musk, has too much power and control of the internet. If this power were to be switched to government, who would inspect the government work? What's the checks and balances proposed for that? So it's not just a question of power switching, which people are making it. It's not just a matter of a power switch in which the people are in between, not as part of the decision making.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say that sort of one person owning it was necessarily per se a bad thing, but the issue is accountability and transparency, and I think that's what we don't have in the social media and online space, which is so incredibly powerful in terms of shaping, in the case of Twitter, obviously shaping views and opinions, news, how salient a news item is, or all of those kind of things. Really does have a very powerful sort of platform. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the need for regulation, is to bring that out into the open. Like, what are the decision-making processes for who can post what on the platform, how things can be shared and otherwise, and knowing what it is that you're seeing and why, and that kind of thing. So I think it's about accountability, and no one's suggesting that we nationalize social media.
And would you let Trump back on Twitter?
I mean, it's not really my sort of decision, is it really? But I mean, I'm not particularly for a sort of cancel culture myself. I just think it's about it's about there being clear guidelines that are enforced and that are accountable and that people understand and that are sort of followed through, I think. So yeah.
Thank you. And maybe I'll just end on a bit of a crystal ball question. So future gazing,
Okay.
what would you like the government to achieve in the next 3 to 6 months when it comes to digital regulation?
Well, I'd like them to sort of be a government. So I think we all would, wouldn't we? Really, at the moment, you know, because there are costs of inaction. So that is why, for all of the legitimate concerns there are about the online safety bill, many of which I share, you know, we need to get that done. But then there's a whole backlog of other things waiting that are very important as well. In this space that are not necessarily directly in the space, but like digital markets bill, even the media bill is important in terms of sort of streaming and other things which sort of relate as well, and making sure that we've got a you know, that people are sort of accessing good content.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining. It's always really impressive how you can cover so many different files all at once. Very impressive. But yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us. And I think everyone in the audience has enjoyed the discussion that we've had today.
Thank you for having me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Okay,
you.
see you again soon. Bye.